Hello, everyone, and welcome to my thoughts on The Last of Us, Episode 7, Left Behind, which is based on the DLC of the same name for The Last of Us game. As always, the first few minutes of this review will be spoiler-free in case you haven't seen the episode yet or played the game. And after that, I will dive deeper into the episode and talk about all the spoilery details. But I will let you know when the time comes. All right. With that out of the way, let's get into it. Like I said, this episode of the show is based on the game's DLC, which is mostly a really long flashback to the events surrounding the moment when Ellie is bitten by the infected, which takes place 3 weeks before she meets Joel. This episode was written by the original writer and director of the game, Neil Druckmann, and it also happens to be the most faithfully adapted episode so far, I think. There are a couple scenes that were added that weren't in the game, and there are some that were in the game that weren't in the show, but the majority of this episode is shot for shot, line by line from the game, and it was done very well. When the credits rolled, I sat back in my chair fully satisfied because it hit all the major points in the game, and even though the majority of the episode is a flashback, they didn't ignore what was happening in the present time either, which I have to admit was something that I feared they would do. Ignore the present time, I mean. And I'll talk about that a bit more in the spoiler section. This episode was lighthearted most of the time, which we needed after the emotionally heavy episode 6, right? But there were also a few heartbreaking moments in this one too, because let's face it, this is The Last of Us. Happiness is fleeting, right? But when it's there, it's the best thing ever. And the acting in this episode, especially by Bella Ramsey, is really good. I think this is her best episode so far. There were so many moments that made me smile because I was seeing Game Ellie come to life in the show. I won't say that this is my favorite episode, though, for the same reasons that I don't like the DLC better than the main game. But it is a really good episode, and it was done very well, and it connects to the main story in an important way, which is what a flashback should always do. I'll enjoy watching this one again. And yeah, that's really all I have to say without giving away the details. So this is your fair warning as I switch on over to my spoiler review. If you haven't seen the episode or played the game and don't want to be spoiled by either, save this video for later and come back after you've seen the episode to let me know what you thought in the comments below. I really do love talking about this show with you guys. Okay, let's get into the spoilers. This episode picks up pretty much where we left off at the end of episode 6, where Joel had been gravely injured and is bleeding out, and Ellie has no idea what to do. And I was very happy that they showed us what happens after that, because I knew that this episode would be the Left Behind flashback because I saw the trailer for this episode. But I was afraid that that's all it would be and that we wouldn't get to see what happens with Joel until episode 8. I was afraid that they would do what the game did, where after it fades to black on Joel's unconscious phase, we skip quite a bit of time and we're suddenly playing Ellie off doing her own thing on her own. And you have no idea what happened to Joel for a long time. And yeah, I'm so glad that they didn't do it that way in the show. It works really well in the game, don't get me wrong. That's how the game should be. It causes a lot of tension. But in the game, it doesn't give us an hour-long flashback right here either, like the show does. And if it had, it would have killed the tension instead. And according to the showrunners, we almost had that tension-killing episode. The original script for this episode didn't include any of the present time stuff with Joel and Ellie, and was only the flashback. But HBO told them that they need to connect the two stories, and so they did. And I found it actually strange that they didn't initially connect them, because in the game, they are connected, even more than they are in the show. Anyway, so I was happy with how this episode started. So we're in an abandoned neighborhood and we see a wide track in the snow, as though someone had dragged something flat and wide through there, and the snow is stained with blood in the track. And it focuses on the house that the track is leading to, and we cut to the garage of that house. where Joel and Ellie's horse is standing, still saddled and bridled. And there's a bloody sleeping bag on the floor with a rope tied to it. So we know that Ellie made a sort of gurney to tow Joel behind the horse. And that's what she does in the game, too. That's how she got him over there. Then we can hear Joel screaming in pain, and we cut to the basement of the house where Joel is lying on a mattress on the floor, and Ellie is frantically trying to stop the bleeding of his stab wound. But Joel knows that he's dying. There's nothing Ellie can do. She can't stop the bleeding. They don't have medical supplies, nothing she can stitch him up with. He knows he's going to die, and he probably doesn't want Ellie to watch him die either, so he tells her to leave him there. When she, of course, refuses and tells him, quite forcefully, to shut up. And when Joel can't get her attention with his voice, he grabs her by the coat and pulls her close and shakes her a bit and tells her to leave him and to go north back to Tommy's. And then he shoves her away from him. And Ellie just stares at him for a minute, but she finally gives in. She covers Joel with his coat and then she leaves. And as she turns away, a single tear trails down Joel's eye, and that tear could mean any number of things. It could represent his regret of having to push Ellie away, and this will be the last memory she has of him. It could represent his grief and his fear, because here he is, failing her just as he feared he would do. He's forced to send her out into the world on her own, and he doesn't know if she's going to make it back to Tommy's by herself, and there's nothing he can do about it. And it could represent his grief of having to send her away. After leaving Jackson, he's fully committed himself to Ellie. He'd crossed that threshold that he'd been hiding behind since they met. And no sooner had he opened up and conquered his fear and allowed himself to care and love again than he's forced to give it all up. That tear could represent any of those things and more, but likely it's all of them. And it's a really sad moment. But Ellie stops at the top of the stairs just as she's reaching for the doorknob. And she's struggling with her decision. But we don't get to see what she ultimately decides to do. Not yet, anyway. Because we go back in time. And most of the rest of the episode is a flashback that takes place 3 weeks before Ellie meets Joel and Tess. And you guys, the rest of this episode is straight out of the game. If you haven't played the game and you're just watching the show like blind, all of this is in the game, or most of it anyway. They didn't change a whole lot. They added a couple scenes, like the opening sequence to the flashback where Ellie is doing PE with a bunch of other girls in the Fedra school. And then she ends up getting into a fight with another girl who picks on her. And so she's sent to the principal's office, essentially, Captain Kwong, who I'm assuming is the leader of Fedra and the Boston QZ, or maybe just the commanding officer of the school, most likely. He talks to Ellie about her attitude and her fighting with the other girls, and basically gives her a pep talk about her potential and her future and where it's going, and encourages her to do better so that she can have a better life and one day become an officer, and have a better life and maybe actually make a difference in the QZ. And it seems like that appeals to her because she agrees to shape up. And she also later, a couple times in the episode, mentions or refers back to what the captains told her, as if like it really sunk in, like his talk really sunk in, and she believes what he said, and she wants to be somebody, make a difference. So yeah, those two scenes weren't in the game. But after this, pretty much everything else we see is just copy and pasted from the game. And I don't mean that as a negative thing. I'm actually very happy that they didn't change much about this side story, because, they could have, thinking that they could make it better. But it was already good enough as it was in the game. It didn't need to be enhanced. I'm very happy that the Druckmann was able to practice restraint when writing this script. Anyway, the next scene is where the actual DLC for the game starts, with Ellie sleeping and Riley sneaking into her room and freaking Ellie out. And then Riley tells her that she joined the Fireflies, and their conversation is pretty much spot on with the game. I don't want to go into too much detail about these scenes that actually are pretty much like the game, because the main purpose of my review is to point out the differences and discuss whether or not they worked. So I'll just go through these quickly. So then Riley convinces Ellie to sneak out with her, and they go to an abandoned mall that's been sealed up. And Riley has planned an entire evening of fun for Ellie. And she turns on the power inside the mall, and all the lights come on, and Ellie is wide-eyed and amazed. And the next 40 minutes are just Ellie and Riley doing stuff in the mall. Ellie is wide-eyed and bushy-tailed through the whole thing, getting super excited about everything, things as simple and basic as an escalator, which of course she's never seen before. And there's a carousel that they ride on, and Riley gives Ellie the joke book that she later reads to Joel, and they get their pictures taken in a photo booth, and they wear Halloween masks and dance on a countertop to music on a Walkman. They both have crushes on each other and eventually share a kiss. And all of these things are straight out of the game. Even the scene where Riley admits that the Fireflies are sending her away and she'll never see Ellie again, and the argument that they have about it. The order that these scenes take place in is a little different from in the game, but yeah, all these scenes are in the game. The only changes they made to this entire sequence, other than the order that they appear in, is the fact that there were a few more activities that they did in the game that they didn't add to the show, like throwing bricks at car windows and goofing off with more stuff in the Halloween store, and also a water gun fight. But none of those were really important to the story. They were just stuff to do in the game while you're playing it. And there is also the scene where they play the Mortal Kombat game in the arcade. And this is really the only thing that they changed from the original. The actual event was different. In the game, they couldn't use the actual Mortal Kombat game because it isn't Naughty Dog's IP, so they couldn't put it in their game. So they made up a knockoff version of the game just for that universe called The Turning, which has its own original character called Angel Knives. And in the game, The Turning doesn't work, and they don't have coins to operate it. So instead of actually playing the game for real, like in the show, Riley has Ellie stand at the controls and close her eyes, and then Riley narrates the game to Ellie, since I guess Riley has played it before and she can describe it in great detail. Or maybe she just read a game manual, I don't know. And Ellie pushes all the right buttons, or Riley tells her which buttons to push, while imagining the whole thing in her head. And we get to hear the sound effects and everything, and we have to push the buttons correctly in order to do the different combos and stuff. And they probably did it this way so that they wouldn't have to animate the game within the game. But in the show, it was a lot easier to just have the arcade game there, so they just decided that it works instead of not working. And this, of course, is what Ellie is referencing in episode 3 when she finds that old Mortal Kombat game in the convenience store and tells Joel that a friend of hers taught her how to play it. And then, since this is The Last of Us, and no one can be happy for more than a few hours without something bad happening, Ellie and Riley's fun and games comes to a sudden halt when an infected attacks them. Because it got woke up by their noise. It was hiding in a back room somewhere. There is a desperate fight in which Ellie finally kills the infected, but not before it has bitten both her and Riley. And the acting in this scene was just great. Bella Ramsey's portrayal of Ellie as she realizes that she's been bitten, and that instant and desperate denial followed immediately by dreadful realization of reality. It was so heartbreaking. Even though we know that Ellie survives this, Ellie doesn't know, and she's terrified and devastated, and for just a moment, her acting convinces you that she doesn't survive this, that this is horrible. And then she acts out in anger, smashing up the glass countertop where she and Riley had danced only minutes before. And Ellie does this in the game too. Ellie is portrayed perfectly in this entire DLC. So I was really happy about that. And then she sits down with Riley and asks what they're going to do. And Riley says that they have two options. They could take the easy way out. It would be quick and painless, but she's not fond of that option. And the second option is to just wait it out, be all poetic, and lose their minds together. Whether they have 2 minutes left or 2 days, they still had that time together, and it was worth living. And in that moment, we switch back to the present time. and Ellie is still standing at the top of the stairs with her hand on the doorknob. And this is where the two stories connect. In that moment, Ellie is remembering back to that night with Riley and the words that Riley said, that even if you only have 2 minutes left with someone, those 2 minutes are precious and worth living. And so she makes up her mind and begins to frantically search every cupboard and drawer in the house, looking for anything that can help save Joel. And it switches back and forth between the past and the present a few times as each version of Ellie makes her choice and chooses to fight for those last 2 minutes or last 2 days or whatever it is she can get. And she finally finds a spool of thread with a needle, and she rushes back to Joel, and he's still got the tear in his eye, and she grabs his hand, and they share a long look. Neither says a word, but they don't have to. Ellie's resolute expression and her fingers threading through Joel's says it all, and Joel grips her hand back, and he doesn't argue her decision. He knows that she won't leave him to die any more than he would leave her. And then Ellie gets to work sewing up Joel's wound, and it's painful for him, and Ellie is wholly out of her element and terrified, but she presses on, and that is where the episode ends. Now, there is actually quite a bit of the DLC that didn't make it into the show. In fact, probably at least half of it didn't make it in. Because in the game, the present-day Ellie is doing something completely different from present-day Ellie in the show. In the game, Ellie actually takes Joel to an old mall and locks him into one of the stores. Then she spends a lot of time exploring the mall and trying to find a first aid kit or something. And there are infected in the mall that she has to deal with. And the game switches back and forth between the past and the present as both versions of Ellie explore two different malls for two very different reasons. But everything that happens in each time period is sort of parallels each other. And so it's really clever. I liked how they told it. And Ellie eventually finds a first aid kit inside the helicopter that had crashed through the roof of the mall. And then, of course, since it is a game and there have to be more enemies to fight, and so a bunch of raiders from the same group that attacked them at the university tracked them there. And Ellie has to take them out all by herself. And I totally get why they didn't put that in the show. It would have just been a little too much. But then after Ellie patches Joel up using the needle and sutures from the first aid kit, she tows Joel out of there on the gurney she made for the horse to pull. And eventually, in the main game, brings him to that basement in the house that we see in the show. Or at least I can only assume it's the same house. But yeah, I totally get why in the show they didn't have Ellie trying to find first aid in the mall. All that would have been... It would have made the episode a lot longer, for one thing, and it would have also contributed nothing significant to the story, because the main beats of that sequence are still in the show. Basically, her helping Joel. That's really the only thing that matters, is that she helps Joel, that she chooses not to leave him behind. So, yeah, all the best beats are there. They just take place under slightly different circumstances to make it shorter. The show's version feels more desperate too. And time sensitive, because Joel is literally bleeding out still, and it only takes a moment for Ellie to make the decision to stay with him after all. And then she's frantically searching for something to help. In the game, she spends an awful long time sneaking around the mall, looking in every store for first aid, killing infected, reading notes, looting, and things like that. By the time Ellie finally got back to Joel, he would be all bled out, I think. But of course he's not. But I think the show does a really good job of isolating and adapting the most important parts of the story and only giving us that in each episode. And they did a really good job. But this episode does leave some things unanswered. Does Joel actually make it? If you haven't played the game, you still don't know. But I guess there's more hope that he will now. Although infection is extremely likely in those unsanitary conditions without water or clean bandages or antiseptic, and who knows what sort of internal injuries he might have, right? So there's still a very high chance that Joel won't survive it. But we will have to wait until the next episode to find out for sure, because I'm not going to spoil the future for you guys. Just this episode. And another thing that the episode leaves unsaid is what actually ended up happening with Ellie and Riley in the end. The game doesn't say either, and we can only assume that eventually Riley turned and Ellie didn't, and Riley probably attacked Ellie, and Ellie was forced to kill her best friend. And this is probably what Ellie was alluding to in episode 4, when she told Joel that
it wasn't my first time.
And that's just really sad for anyone to go through, but a kid especially, a kid who's never experienced violence or death before now. This is the first time that Ellie has ever experienced death. And it made her grow up real fast. Yeah, kids don't get to be kids long in that world, do they? This episode was pretty perfect as far as adaptations go. In fact, I actually liked a lot of what the show did more than the game in some cases, especially the parts after they get bitten. In the show, it just feels so much more tragic and emotional than it did in the game. The same with Ellie tending to Joel, who in the game is actually unconscious the entire time, which in the show he's not, and he has to suffer through the pain of it all, and the worry and fear for Ellie, which game Joel is completely oblivious to. And I just think that the acting was top notch in this episode, as I've already said, I think. Not just on Bella Ramsey's part, but also on the actress that plays Riley. I can't remember her name off the top of my head. Storm something. Sorry. But, great job, the both of them. And as usual, before I wrap up my review, I'll just mention a few little things that I noticed. I like that they put all of Ellie's interests in her room at the Federal School. You can see posters about dinosaurs and music and Mortal Kombat and space. And on her nightstand is a book about paleontology and a lunar lander model that she must have made herself out of popsicle sticks and bottle caps. These are Ellie's interests in the game too, and there's some really nice moments in the game that focus on these interests. So I'm glad that they put them in the show too. And Ellie and Riley find a bottle of booze and take turns drinking it. In episode 6, Ellie tries whatever is in Joel's flask and says,
"Yep, still gross."
And you can tell she thinks what she's drinking with Riley is gross too, but she pretends it's not because she wants to impress Riley. She doesn't want Riley thinking she's a wimp, right? But apparently she's not as concerned about Joel thinking that she's a wimp. Or maybe she doesn't think that Joel would think that she's a wimp for not liking booze. I don't know. I just thought it was funny. There were also a couple Easter eggs from the game that I noticed. The Dawn of the Wolf movie poster, which Ellie comments on when she's traveling with Joel in the game. And Joel says that he was forced to watch it, and it was terrible. And the name of the arcade is the exact same as in the game, too. And after Riley tells Ellie that she got her a gift, Ellie tries to guess what it is, naming all sorts of outlandish things, from dinosaurs to tacos. And this is something that Ellie does in the second game when she tries to guess the surprise that Joel got her for her birthday. And there's sort of a scene like that in the actual Left Behind DLC too, but she only asks if it's a dinosaur. And that is the thing she always asks. If she tries to guess anything at any time in any of the games, her first guess is always, is it a dinosaur? So I just thought that was cute. And of course, the gift that Riley gives to Ellie is the joke book that she reads to Joel in episode 4. And of course, the joke book is in the game too, and Riley gives it to her in the game as well. And there are probably more Easter eggs that I just didn't notice. And if you guys noticed other ones, let me know about them in the comments, because I think it would be fun to know about them. Anyway, yeah, that's about all I have to say about this episode, I think. A lot shorter review this time, but that's because there were a lot less scenes that they changed. And I really only spent a lot of time talking about the changes from the game and whether or not they work in the show. That's what these reviews are for. Some episodes are almost completely changed, so my reviews tend to be longer for those ones. Only 2 more episodes to go, you guys. I am very excited to see them. This series has so far surpassed any and all expectations I had before going in. It's been quite a pleasant surprise, as I totally thought that this show would bomb when I first heard about it, right? I've never been more happy to be proven wrong. Anyway, you guys, what did you think about it? Let me know if you played this DLC in the game and how this episode ranks in comparison, and whatever other thoughts you have. I'd love to see you down in the comments. If you liked this video and my other episode reviews and want to support the channel, you can do that by joining my Patreon or by sending me a coffee on my coffee page, because let's face it, YouTube makes it nearly impossible to monetize these review videos. And so these videos are solely a labor of love. But if all you can do is like, comment, and subscribe, then that is a lot of help too. I really appreciate it. I always appreciate anything you guys are able to do to support the channel. I hope you all have a great day, and I will see you in the next one. Until then, remember to play safe, play nice, and have fun. Bye, guys.